Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So, this is going to be a little bit of a series. I thought I always show everybody what my builds are that I successfully build, but I never show people like the builds that I completely fuck up. And or not like completely fuck up, but blow like 20 divine in, and then wonder why the hell I did it, and then realize that I shouldn't listen to stream all the time and just build crazy builds like this, but it was fun doing it either way. But anyway, so this is an Atziri Rule Jugg. Now, the whole reason why this exists, so Atziri Rule, for anyone who follows my channel, was a build that I was playing with a few leagues ago, and it was quite good. At least on the Elementalist, where Ignite is a thing. But on the Jugg, not so much. So Atziri Rule is a staff that drops off Uber Atziri, and it does Queen's Demand, which is basically this, right? So it's like a Val Flame Blast and like a Val Lightning Strike Call, right? And basically the concept behind this build was to proc Ignite while being relatively tanky all at the same time. Now, I achieved the tankiness part, and I actually got this working from a pretty decent setup. Now, to use Life Tap and everything. DPS on this, and I'll put this this POB in the description as well for anyone who wants to give this a whirl. Now, config-wise, it's probably just a touch inflated, though I think I do generate frenzy charges on this, so I'll tick that on for shits and giggles. Yeah, so DPS side, we have to completely ignore the total damage per ignite. That's like over a certain duration of time. It's actually just like ignite DPS is 629,000. Ignite DPS, which, let's be real, like, that's not great. But the tankiness is 113,000. It's way better tankiness-wise than the Elementalist I played a few leagues ago. And regen like bursted out at 2,500, right? So if you sit there idle, and this is because it runs Surging Vitality, I guess I'll talk through the build a little more too. It runs Surging Vitality, so it sort of has a pretty okay amount of recovery. Like, it runs around at like 1,100 life regeneration. So like, if you could find a better use for the tree with spell skills on the Jugg that would proc Ignite better than this, absolutely, you know, give it a whack. Now, it does overcap reses. It has like no chaos res, even though I do have an Atziri's Promise on this build. And it is technically a max block build because it does run glancing blows on the tree as well. Because, you know, I thought, why not? We'll do max block with a stave, which is very doable with staves. Actually, it doesn't have frenzy charges, it has power charges. Actually, no, correction, it has frenzy and power charges. So it has all charges. There we go. So the basic concept of this build is you take Replica Shroud of Lightness, which is like 1 or 2 div. I think it was like 1.5 div. It was really cheap. You stack a shitload of fire damage to spell and damage over time. Abyssal Jewels, which I'll add, were not cheap. I think they were like anywhere up to 140 to 100 chaos each. And there weren't many on the market either. So if you go looking for this, it's going to be hard to find the gear. And then basically we run an All's Uprising. We proc on 5 auras with 4 major auras I'll add. So somehow managed to always fit that in these builds. So Determination, Malevolence, Anger, and Purity of Elements. So I got all the big chungus ones. And then basically run around and then proc Ignites on enemies and kill a heap of shit. And I'll play some footage at the very end of the video so you can see what it actually looks like. Now, I did, you know, get a Precursor's Ring with Bleed Cannot Be Inflicted. Helm-wise, it wasn't the best helm. I really focused on life regeneration rate. I did have all my res sorted out except for Chaos res. Now, the other thing to note with the Atziri's Rule is you'll also need to make sure it's 6 length. So that was like 1 div, and that's 1 div I'm never going to get back because nobody's going to buy an Atziri's Rule. I'll probably sell it for like 50k. So I lost currency on this build, but in the, you know, notion of science, in the mind of science. And then I already had all this other gear on the build. I was sitting in my stash except for the pyre, so I was like, oh, fuck it, we'll just slap it on and see how it goes. Look, I'm not disappointed. Now, this build doesn't do exposure. If you had exposure, you'd probably get it close to like a mil fire dot. And on a Jugg, if you just wanted to use this as a T16 map farmer, it's actually quite good. But yeah, that's basically the concept of the build. Proc Ignite, run around with Infernal Cry and Call to Arms on. And then, yeah, now I did use clusters. It did actually use a lot of the same gearing as my other character that I ran in ooh, geez, in my RF Jugg setup. So it's basically the same tree, because the train of thought was, okay, maybe I could replicate a tree that tanky with that amount of regeneration, but use that series rule and get ignites to work. On paper, it looks like it could work, but in practicality, it's not as practical. But it's still not it's not fun, if that makes sense. Anyway, I'll run through I'll run through a map and show you what it looks like in game, and we'll just run through like a strand map, and then I guess I'll talk through my failure of a build and how I put it together, so that at least you could get it to run T16s. Now, I can do Guardians, just maybe Minotaur and Chimera. I wouldn't do the other two because you might get wrecked. But anyway, yeah, let's have a look at the build. By the way, I also bought Fan the Flames and Blowback. I don't even know what I'm going to use that for, because the idea was you ignite one pack and then it lights everything else up and everything dies. But yeah, it just was not that good. Anyway, let's look at some gameplay and you can draw a judgment for yourself. Okay, so we'll just run like a standard T16 map for Strand here. So it's just an Alch and Go map. Unique boss has more life, which is not great, but whatever. Doesn't really matter too much. Alright, so like straight up, it wasn't a... Like, as you can see here, it's not a bad build. Like, it actually has pretty good screen clear. Like, if you treated it for what it is, it's quite a good, like, map clear build. Like, if you just Alch and Go mapping. So I won't worry too much about it unless like an Exalt or Divine drop or something rare. And even like the Lightning Strike or whatever works pretty okay. Like, it's not terrible. As you can see, oh, there we go. Talk about fucking Divine on screen. I'm only picking up Divines. Bam, Divine drop. Maybe they'll make back some of the currency I lost on this fucking build. Alright, so like, it's not unfun. This is what I find really intriguing about this build. It's just like, it's a trolly ass build. Should it exist? Probably not. Why it exists? This is how my brain works sometimes. Like, what would have been even stupider is if I tried to put it on a champion or a gladiator or something. But then again, that might have been pretty cool as well. And then have some type of bleed proc. But anyway. So, basically, like, bossing wise, like, these bosses have more HP. Like, if you're just tackling standard maps, like, if you had exposure on this would burn them down quicker. But as you can see, it's quite tanky. You can just sort of sit there and take the hits. So yeah, that's it for the gameplay. It's not terrible. Like, I'm not going to take it through all the rungs because it just simply can't do it, or it could probably do it actually, but because it's tanky enough, but it just take forever to do it. This is like a acquired skill, but you know, you could take this build and you could really juice this up and add like damage over time and stuff like that to it. But I'll talk through the build anyway, so you can see what I've done. I'll just do it like a real quick cover off, and because this is a failed build. And by the way, I'm not going to advocate this build. Like, I'm not telling you, oh, you should play this build, it's awesome. But anyway, let's peel it back and have a look at the elements of the build. Okay, so let's just have a look at the gearing. So, like, what was the logic behind this? So, gearing-wise, Helm was just life regeneration rate and int, because getting attributes to work on this was a bit of a shit. Then chest was replica Shroud of Lightness, and then basically just having 6 hypnotic jewels, hypnotic eye jewels, where we had fire damage to spells and damage over time. Now, you could do something very similar to this with like a fire skill, and maybe use a Cane of Coolamak or something like that, and you could make something out of this. Like, it'd work. Like, it scales with fire damage and burn damage. So, you know, that is a possibility. I did use an All's Uprising with Anger. The price of this is like dirt cheap. So like 50 chaos. So, you know, you could make a lot of fire builds with this and you could really juice it up. I'm just, at this point, not creative enough to do that. And also I want to turn this into another build, which I spent 10 Divine on yesterday, getting gear for. This uses the Pyre because of the burning damage, and it does apply burn. So that's why it uses that. Now, I did have a spare Precursor's emblem, and I think there's probably a few of these, which gave me Onslaught while at max Frenzy charges and percentage to gain Frenzy charges on kill. So that is in the build. You don't need that. You could craft a ring very similar to that, and just use an Onslaught flask or something like that instead of a Quartz flask. Atziri's Rule, obviously, it's the whole concept of the build. Is it good? Not really, but it works. Like, you can see it did T16 Alch and Go maps, and it did it pretty okay, and pretty safely, actually. Gloves, I did really luck out with these. I got, like, damage during any flask effect, and I could probably use this on ample other builds as well, because it's quite good. I don't have the right implicits on this because I threw like 200 Eldritch Orbs or whatever it is at it, and it just wasn't playing ball, and then I didn't want to throw another 100 Chaos at it, or 200 Chaos at it, so I left it be. If it had exposure, it would do a minimum of 18% exposure, thanks to this node down here, Elemental Mastery Exposure. Now, that would do a significant increase to the level of dot that it applies, probably get it close to like maybe 750, 800,000 fire dot, but again, that's not a lot of dot in the scale of other builds that can do dot way better. Belt, literally just regeneration, resistances, and total life. That's pretty much it. And then if you're playing any fire builds, Legacy of Fury is just like the go-to because you can apply really good procs with Scorch. And it gives you a sort of explodey effect, which is pretty nice. Now, Flask, I could run this at 400 Delve. And if you watch the stream that I was streaming last night, this could actually moderately run 400 depth and could comfortably run 300 depth in Delve. So I had a Quartz Flask built into this. Rumi's Concoction to push the block up to almost total max block, even though it's glancing blows. Cinder Swallow, obviously, which does, Ignite proc, because this does proc Ignite. Atziri's Promise pushes the damage up, as well as providing you a Chaos Res. And then I also had just another Granite Flask on top to buff up my armor, and then all damage while getting hit, because this build basically is predicated on getting smashed by enemies. Like any Jug build, it's made to take damage. And that's pretty much it for the gearing. Like, it wasn't like crazily geared or anything like that. But we'll talk about the gem setups in the next part of the video. Rightio, so for gem setups in the helm, I just had Purity of Elements, Flame Dash, Arrogance, and Vitality, and make sure that they're not linked, otherwise Purity of Elements will try and reserve life instead of Vitality reserving life for you. And that just meant I could run more auras and run a full level Vitality at the cost of a little bit of health, similar to my Jug. My RF Jug, that was actually a really good build compared to this one, which is not even comparable. And then in my Atziri's Rule, I ran Life Tap, Less Duration, Awaken Swift Affliction, Burning Damage, Unbound Ailments, and Awaken Death. As you can see, I bought Awaken Jewels, but I bought pretty cheap ones because the level 5 Awakens on these aren't worth a great deal. So if I want to play another dot build, which I am, I can repurpose them. And that will be something that came up in stream and hopefully will actually work. And it'll be using Reaper. So yeah, watch the space. Now in my gloves, I've got Malevolence, I've got Enlighten, which are really cheap now in League, Anger, and Determination. And then basically in my boots, Infernal Cry, Life Tap, Casting Damage Taken, and Molten Shell. So everything that I cast is based on life, and I regenerate shit tons of life. So no brainer, run Life Tap, make your life easy instead of trying to struggle for regeneration. Anyway, let's talk about the skill tree next. Alright, so this is a 92 skill tree, right? So it's achievable within a reason of whatever. Now, this build, if you hadn't played or you were looking for something different and you wanted to play just T16 maps, you could play it, even if you're like a newer player. Again, just going to preface that, not recommending this build because this is sort of a build fail. At least the way that I see it, it's not enough. Anyway, so basically we come down from the Jug starting point. We'll pick up Prismatic Skin. You always want that in the Jug. Now, this does use Forbidden Flesh and it does use Unbreakable, but you could get away with not running Unbreakable and basically just like getting rid of Untiring or something like that. Because it doesn't have very much body armor or any body armor. You could ditch Untiring and just run Unbreakable and then run these Ascendancies, but we'll talk about that at the end. So you don't need Unbreakable is what I'm saying, because it's quite an expensive setup. though cheaper than last league. Then we come down and we need the proficiency and hard knock nodes to get our attributes up. Then we use Solar Steel, you want Champion of Cause, and then the 8% reservation efficiency mastery here. Or not mastery, but point. Then you come down and get Bloodless, Call to Arms, because we need that to proc Infernal Cry. Then Juggernaut, we've got our other Forbidden Flame duel here. Life, and then Vitality has 100% increase. Actually, this node is redundant because it won't apply to this build, so we could just chuck it into here and have more fire damage. Or actually more life. It doesn't make any difference. And then basically, I do have a large cluster duel set up here, which I just repurposed out of my old RF build, which had Disorientating Display, Cremator, and Smoking Remains, just to push fire damage up. And then I picked up Whirling Barrier with Staff Mastery, and I also get recovery off this when I block, because I have max block. I always get like 2% life recovery on attack block. And then I come across and get Sanctity, Discipline and Training, Holy Dominion, and this is to get it up to like 95% Ignite chance as well. And then Glancing Blows and Steelwood Stance, and this gets me up to like max stave block without having to throw any more points up here into it. And then I come to Divine Judgment. Now you want all these nodes in this radial because they scale the Ignite damage up in every possible way, and also you want to max out your Ignite as much as possible. I did get a Watcher's Eye for this with fire damage with Anger and life recovery with Vitality. This was like absolutely dirt cheap too. Like this build, void of the couple of things that cost like 3-4 Divine, was actually quite cheap. If you really wanted to make it cheaper. And I did pick up an extra endurance charge because, you know, Jugg, so having 5 to 6 is better than 3. Or 3 or 4. And then we pick up Sovereignty, Reservation Mastery, Purity of Flesh, we get a little bit of Chaos Res, and then Holy Fire, and basically all these points here to get maximum Ignite. And then I had Fan the Flames and Blowback. Realistically, you need Fan the Flames so that you can light more enemies on fire, which is why it clears relatively quickly. And then I had a Surging Vitality, and yeah, ideally I'd have a large cluster if I had more points and if I sort of better allocated things. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the skill tree. Alright, so for Ascendancies, I had Untiring, which you don't really need. You could get Unbreakable first, Unflinching, Unstoppable, and Unyielding, with Unyielding being the last point that you pick up, which as you get endurance charges, you actually get a lot more damage. But that's pretty much it. Now I did look at this with the Chieftain. It doesn't significantly increase with the Chieftain. So that's just something to bear in mind. If you want to play with this build, by all means take it and play with it, is basically what I'm getting at. Not advocating, but it's something interesting and cool. Anyway, that's basically it for the skill tree from the Ascendancy perspective. So just a bit of like closing remarks. I didn't hate this build. I've played some really bad builds over the years. I didn't think that this was an absolutely atrocious build compared to some of the builds that I've fucked up in the past. I thought this was an interesting concept, and I wanted to prove whether or not it would work. It's not incompetent as a build, but it's also not a good build, and I'm definitely going to put in capital letters, this is not a good build, not advocating for you to play it. But if you did want to try it, the POB will be in the description. You can do whatever you want with it, play around with it. Maybe you can make it work way better than me. I'm sure there is plenty of people out there that can do that. You know, you can do a lot of things with Mage Blood as well. So yeah, with a bigger budget, this would probably actually be quite a okay build. If you could push it up to like maybe 5 million fire dot or ignite dot, then this build would be significantly better in every possible way. Anyway, I'll leave you with that. If you like this video and you want to see more of the builds that I put together but don't really like, or it's not really a great build, and then I end up respecing whatever, then let me know in the comments your thoughts. But until next time, have a good one, and stay tuned for the next iteration of this build, which this is going to get respec'd into a Reaper. Anyway, until next time, see you later, and bye.